Have you ever had the feeling that whatever you do, you don't seem to progress anymore in training? You're hitting that plateau. In this video, I will give you 3 methods to break that plateau. I will specifically focus on hybrid sports, and I will make the distinction between CrossFit, which is more technical, strength biased, and Hyrox, which is obviously more conditioning, endurance biased. All right, it's time to break that plateau. Let's go. Hi everyone, I'm Gomar. I'm a senior scientist at ETH Zurich based in Switzerland. And during the last 10 years of my life, I've been studying the interaction between nutrients and exercise and how those affect muscle health. I've published dozens of peer-reviewed papers in this field, and now I want to provide some of that science back to you guys. All right, let's dig into it. So, how can you look at progress in strength and conditioning typically throughout time? As we all know, as you begin, it initially goes super quick. The strength gains, but also the endurance gains are heavily accumulating the first couple of weeks to months. But then you're kind of stalling out, and eventually after several years of training, most people hitting those plateaus, those physiological plateaus. And that's also how steroids come into the pictures. Then obviously it's a time for some people to go to steroids. But that will not be the topic of today. Today we are going to look at specific training methods and just overall ideas to try to break that plateau if you are already a relatively advanced athlete, mostly in hybrid sports. And we are going to focus on CrossFit, the ultimate hybrid sport, at least the first that was really putting into the pictures 12 to 14 years ago, but then also Hyrox. And Hyrox is a more conditioning based hybrid sport where you have a lot of running and more high rep, lower weight. And if you are an athlete in one of those sports, I think this video will be quite interesting for you. So I've been a coach for several years, and what I saw a lot is that people hitting a plateau because they are just doing too many metcons. You see this typical CrossFit goer, we're talking about CrossFit now, and he just or she just comes in 5 times a week and does a metcon at 95 to 100% of their maximal effort. Right? I think that is obviously not the way to go, and there are better ways to actually train and improve your overall fitness and also CrossFit performance. So then we have to think about one specific method, one specific thing you always have to look for if you want to keep progressing in CrossFit, and that is, in my opinion, movement efficiency. So what is movement efficiency? Basically in literature it's described as the amount of work or the amount of oxygen uptake at a given intensity. And some people, let's say, move better, so they expend less energy for the same amount of work. You can see it here. Athlete A and athlete B have a different, let's say, movement efficiency. I'm talking about, for example, wall balls per minute. Some people will have a higher oxygen uptake compared to others. There's many factors that play here. For example, anthropometrics, how heavy the ball is, how well trained the person is, how well trained their muscles are, and so on. But this all, let's say, resonates towards a certain difference between oxygen uptake at a given intensity. And obviously the goal here is to be athlete B, where he or she has a lower oxygen uptake at a higher intensity or more wall balls per minute. So if you look at the literature, you see several examples from this. For example, many people always ask me, how fast should I pedal? Like, what would my cycling or my pedaling rate be to have the maximal efficiency? And for example, here in this study, it has also been shown that movement efficiency, so let's say pedaling efficiency, is higher at 60 rotations per minute compared to 100 rotations per minute. We're not going to dig into if you actually should do this in CrossFit, just an example that just changing the pedaling rate of your erg work could actually improve or affect at least your movement efficiency. So how can you transfer this to CrossFit? It all has to do with biomechanics, as I already referred to earlier. If we take the example of wall balls, the amount of work or the amount of energy you expend per time period, for example, how many wall balls you can do per minute, is always a relationship between the force, so how much you have to work against gravity to move the ball up and down, and obviously also how long or how far the distance the ball has to go. Wall balls for taller athletes are a bit easier compared to wall balls for smaller athletes. All right, so work is always force times distance. And if you would squat not below parallel, but just above parallel, right? Let's say you move then your center of gravity 45 centimeters, compared to an athlete who would go all the way down to below parallel. He or she would squat, let's say 55 centimeters at the dispersion of their center of gravity. That is something just hypothetical, right? It depends obviously how tall the athlete is. But if you would do that calculation, you can see that here I just added some numbers that would calculate the amount of force you need, and also the difference between the below parallel squatter and the no repper who actually squats above parallel. So you can see that squatting above parallel results in approximately 18% less total work per rep. Obviously, if you are doing Hyrox or CrossFit and you would do hundreds of repetitions, or at least 50 or 60 repetitions of wall balls, this would result in a much better time, or at least more reps within a given time period. Here we are talking about a no rep or a rep, but you can also think about it as squatting just below parallel, 1 centimeter below parallel, and squatting, let's say, 15 centimeters below parallel. The movement efficiency of the one who squats just below parallel will be much better and accumulate to a better result at the end. So that's important, I think, to break your plateau. The same goes for deadlifts, right? You always hear the coach saying, yeah, keep the bar close to your shins. Why is this? Also biomechanically, the effort is a ratio between the distance the bar travels from the ground towards your center of gravity, and obviously the load on the bar, how heavy the bar is. And when the distance between the middle part of your body and the bar is further, because for example you don't keep the bar close to your shins, you will have obviously a lot more distance to cover and a lot more effort to put in to do that rep. So it's the same principle as the wall balls. If you add this up for hundreds of reps, which typically occurs in CrossFit, for example, 24.2 open workout, a lot of repetitions of deadlift. If you always have 1 centimeter or 2 centimeter more travel distance, this will accumulate to a lot more work. So if you're a CrossFit athlete and you're feeling like, man, I keep training, I'm doing my metcons, I do everything what the coach says, but I don't really improve, look at your training and movement efficiency. I've been looking a little bit around, and I didn't see any applications where you could, for example, film yourself and then it would provide you some cues on how to improve your movement efficiency. Please let me know in the comment if you are aware of such apps. These are, I think, quite interesting and something to consider as a developer, or as a CrossFit athlete who is keen to improving those statistics. So what you can do now at least is film yourself, try to be as efficient as possible and focus on those weaknesses. This is at least one way to break through your plateau. Then let's move on to, let's say, the more, new sport, Hyrox, which obviously is also a derivative of CrossFit, and all these things also apply what I'm gonna say to CrossFit. But it's clear that Hyrox is much more conditioning, endurance biased, right? There's obviously strength parts and CrossFit specific movements, such as wall balls and sled pushes and pulls, but it's lighter weight and it's just a much longer duration. So how would you break your plateau in those more endurance sports? You can also apply this to triathlon or running, etc. And then you always have to look at, I think, 2 more methods. So we already had movement efficiency. Then I also want to explain you about periodization, how to periodize your training. I will get into that in a second. And then also you want to accumulate as much volume as possible without getting overtrained. So first of all, periodization, right? You can look at it as mesocycles, so big cycles of 8 to 12 weeks, to periodize your training, to have like one specific topic that you want to focus on that training. That's something I think that a lot of Hyrox, but also CrossFit athletes don't do well. They don't really focus. They just do random CrossFit or Hyrox workouts in different, let's say, time domains, and then they hope to get better. But in my opinion, it's much better to, let's say, specifically focus for 8 to 12 weeks on, for example, strength, while also obviously doing some conditioning and some movement specific preparation. But let's say 70% of the movement or of the workouts should be on strength. Then you move on to movement-specific work, for example, in week 13 to 24. This is just an example. Obviously, you can place that around the year how you want. And then you would go for conditioning when you come closer to your competitive season. So always think about 80% of the work would be in your specific topic, and then 20% is accessory work around this. And this will give you a much better focus and improve certain weaknesses within your training. Again, something I see a lot go wrong into CrossFit or Hyrox programming. And then you can move also on to the micro cycle. So the micro cycle, what do I mean with that? It's kind of within a day or within 2 days, how you program your workouts. And again, CrossFit, but also Hyrox is always it's a hybrid sport. So you do strength stuff like wall balls or sled pushes, and more conditioning stuff like erg work or running. If you really want to nail down your training and want to break through that plateau, a good way to do that is to separate your endurance/conditioning sessions by 6 to 12 hours from the strength exercises. This could help you to reduce the interference effect. So I had a big video, maybe you've seen it already, on how to combine strength and endurance. It pops up right above. Yeah, I give you a lot more detail on how to look from which perspective and how to improve this combination of hybrid training. But basically it comes down to, in the beginning, if you start doing any type of hybrid training, you maybe felt yourself, you can improve in both strength and endurance. But once you become better trained, like moderately trained and highly trained, like elite athletes, there is some kind of concurrent effect where one modality will suffer because of too high volume of the other modality. You see that at the right side of the graph here. And how to limit this interference effect, there's a couple of nice studies shown that you could separate your training sessions by 6 to 12 hours. And that way you don't really have this overlapping effect of strength and endurance. So this you can really look at from a micro cycle, and this could help you to also keep improving in both modalities, because obviously that's what you want. A quick detour from this. We just made a collaboration with Strivey. Strivey is let's say a software, a platform where coaches can put on their program and provide their programming to a wide audience, a wide variety of people. And potentially it could be interesting for you if you are a coach or someone who programs to use this platform, because we really are actively developing with them to improve data collection. What I don't really like about these softwares is that it's just a coach and he puts on their program, and then you get your program on your phone, and that's it. You cannot really tweak too much as a coach or as an athlete. But and together with my coach that I program with, we are now trying to implement some data that the athlete can actually add how they feel or how their loads and other parameters, so we can better understand how the athlete actually performed. So we're actively developing together with the developers from Strivey. So if you're interested, you can get a 10% off of your subscription with the code now popping up on the screen and also in the description below, just for your interest. What did we have already? We had movement efficiency, mostly focused on CrossFit. Then we also have, let's say, periodization, interference effect. Try to limit the interference and try to focus on specific tasks within a mesocycle. This is something that is making your training much more structured. Then you also want to accumulate as much volume as possible without getting overtrained. What do I mean with that? Let's say you have athlete A on the top part here of your screen. He or she can do a total volume of 24 hours a week. For Hyrox, mostly endurance, a bit of mixed, and then also strength. That's let's say your typical ones. But then you have athlete B, and in some way or another, he or she has a better training adaptation, training adaptability, and also just better programming, and he or she can do 35 hours of training. You're gonna tell me, if you want in the comments, which one will perform the best over a long period of time, given they don't get overtrained. The volume will definitely be an important part on how well an athlete will perform in competition. So how do you do that? Right? That's the question. If you're gonna do every day a Metcon at 100% of your effort, you probably are not gonna be able to accumulate a lot of training volume. That's when we come to the, let's say, the Norwegian method of training. You probably have heard about this. It's a fancy name for just doing interval sessions at or just below your threshold pace. What do I mean with that? For example, you could do 4 minutes on an erg or even CrossFit specific movements right at or just below your critical speed or your critical threshold power, which would be the average wattage you can potentially hold for a 20-minute all-out test. So this is how you can actually test this, right? Take 95% of that and then you have your functional threshold power. So you're working for 4 minutes around that intensity and then you rest 2 to 3 minutes. And then you go again for 4 to 5 to 6 times. And this is how famous middle distance runner Jakob Ingebrigtsen mostly works. Why does he do that? And that's the major question, obviously, is because the trainer always say that using or implementing this method, the athletes can accumulate a lot of volume. Because they never go over the red line, they're just riding the red line for several minutes, for several hours if you accumulate it throughout the week. They never really get super fatigued and they can go the next day or even a couple hours later, they can go hard again. This is in contrast to, for example, a super hard CrossFit workout. I'm just saying 16-minute AMRAP of thrusters, pull-ups and burpees. You get so fatigued if you go over the threshold for the last couple of minutes that you cannot come back at full force the next day. And that's potentially something that holds you back on the long term. So it's better to do interval sessions with some rest in between to improve your overall fitness here. And this is also explained in this graph. So the Norwegian style, you accumulate fatigue, but you don't go over the red line, you just touch it for a couple minutes and then you rest. While in CrossFit, you ride the red line and then you push the last 2 to 3 minutes to really exhaust yourself. It's not that this is bad and this doesn't really work, for example, in novice athletes, that's not what I said, but just it's not the best way to accumulate a lot of volume, and that is what you want as an athlete. All right, this wraps up this video. Hope you like this kind of content. If you did, give us a quick like and a subscribe. It really doesn't take a lot of time from you and it really helps out the channel. If you're interested in how you can test the endurance capacity of an elite CrossFit athlete, then just watch this video popping up right here.